Hello guys, what is up and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about using the Microsoft Authentication Library for authentication and authorization of your front end and your API. So I have done a lot of authentication and authorization in my time at Microsoft. I do a lot of it for customers that we're working with because it is something that's really important to them to have a secure system. And one of the ways that we do that is we use the Microsoft Authentication Library that connects directly with Azure Active Directory. Actually, it's Microsoft Entra now, but I always call it Azure Active Directory, so I'm sort of changing over the terminology. And basically what that means is that you can then get the users from your Azure Active Directory and Microsoft Entra to actually connect to specific app registrations, and then you can then use that as a way to log into your applications. And it's a really seamless experience, and it's really easy to get up and running with. And so in this video we're going to be showing you using the authorization code with proof key code exchange flow, because that's how you would typically do it for React. Then we're going to in the next video show you how you would then connect that to an API to get the data from the API if you need to be authenticated and authorized for that as well. So one thing that I did want to ask before we get started in this video is, would you prefer the API to be in Python, or would you prefer the API to be in .NET, or would you prefer it to be in Node? So just so that I know which one I'm going to be creating the back end in, and then I could show you how we can then connect the front end to the back end by doing that. Now that you know what we're going to be using for our authentication and our authorization, let's get into it. So as you can see, I have created an initial Vite project using React TypeScript as the template. And so if you just go to the Vite documentation here, you can see that there are a variety of different templates that it supports in both JavaScript and TypeScript, and I have used the React TypeScript one. And you can basically just do npm create Vite with the template that you want to choose. So that is what I did, and I also ran npm install just so that it wouldn't take up into the video time. And so the first thing that we need to do for the actual MSAL authentication is to create an app registration that we can use. So I'm just going to create an app registration for the project, and that is what I'm going to do now. And then we also need to specify what the actual organizational directory is going to be. Is it going to be single tenant or multi-tenant? So single tenant will mean that you will have to specify the tenant ID for logging in, whereas when you do multi-tenant, you don't have to specify a specific tenant ID. You just try and connect to the common library for authentication instead. And so we're gonna do single tenant and just say that we want to connect to our specific tenant, and then we're going to specify the redirect URI. Because we are using a single page application, we need to say that it's going to be a single page application redirect URI, and we also need to say we're going to go to localhost because we're just going to be testing on localhost initially. So notice here that it does say it must be a valid URL, and it also wouldn't let you if I put in 127 for example, it won't let you do HTTP on its own unless it's localhost. So we're just going to put in localhost here, and we're going to put in the URL for Vite, which is, I think it's typically 5173. If it's not, I can quickly update that later, but I'm pretty sure it's 5173. So I'm just going to register that now. And as you can see, the Azure Test Hub front end has now been created with the application client ID and with a tenant ID. So these are the values that you need to be aware of later on, because they're the things that we're going to be using to change in the actual front end application. So one of the things that I am using for help today is I'm using the samples that I used in the Microsoft Learn documentation, which are really useful. Definitely recommend you check them out. But then I'm going to show you how you can use them and integrate them with your project. So in the samples, if we go into the samples here, it will show you have authentication and authorization. We're just going to be doing the authentication for this tutorial, and you can see you have a selection of different options to choose from. So I'm going to choose sign in React. And if I go to the SPA application in here, you will see that there are a few different files that we need to be aware of. The first file that we need to be aware of is the auth config file. And this will be the file that you actually specify the client ID and the authority that you need to use. So you've got your client ID here and your authority here. So I'm just going to take this file here and copy that into my local machine. And then I'm just going to create an auth folder for all the authentication that I'm going to be doing on the front end. And I'm also going to add that file in here. So I'm going to be using kebab case for my project naming, but you use whichever convention that you're familiar with. That's my preference personally. So there are some options in here, like if you want to do silent single sign-on between applications, then you can do that. But I'm going to leave that for now, and I'm just going to copy what is already there and then just talk through what's there for now. So if we have a look at what's in here, we will see that we need to specify the client ID and the authority ID. So the client ID is if we go back to here, is this thing here. So we just need to copy that, and we need to add that into our authentication. And then we also have the authority ID that we need as well. So if I'm just going to use Microsoft Authority, and that will give us the actual list of authority URLs that are commonly used. So if we go into here, you can see you've got common authority URLs. So we've got the one that will be used for single tenancy, which is this one here. And we also have the common one, which I spoke about earlier, where if you use multiple tenants, you typically go on this one. And then you've got organization and consumer ones for typically done for businesses. So I'm just going to copy this one here, and I'm going to add that to my project as well. And this will replace the authority URL. And I also need to get my tenant from my app registration as well. So I'm just going to remove these comments, because I find comments very, very spammy. So I'm going to remove them personally, but if you want to read them and see what the actual comments are saying, just to see if you need to change any of these default configurations, then you are more than happy to do so. You'll notice here that there's an error here where it says Azure MSAL browser cannot be found. So what we need to do is we need to actually install that. So I'm just going to do npm install, and then I'm going to copy that here. Now that's it added. There is also another library that we need to install as well, which is called MSAL React. So I'm just going to do that as well. These are the two libraries that we are going to be using for React, so they're the only things that we need for MSAL. You might notice that you've got a couple of errors here. This is just because we are using TypeScript, and so we just need to infer the usage. Typically you wouldn't use any, but these are not clear what the properties are going to be. So I'm just going to put them in there for now, just so that we don't get those errors. And if we just talk through what these logger options are doing, basically any logs that are done from MSAL will be added to the console from this. So typically you will end up getting a lot of log level info just because it's constantly validating the user's identity. So you might want to remove these two. I'm personally gonna keep them in for now, so you can see what I mean. These are just two things that you might want to consider removing if you don't need them. And so now we need to go into our main file where we are going to actually set up the authentication. So you will see if I go back to here and I go to the samples, if I go to the index.json file, there's a bit of setup in here that basically is used to encompass the application within the authentication. So I am going to use this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into a auth provider, because I just think that's a little bit cleaner in terms of how to work with it and typically how you would do it. So I can just copy this information here and create a new authentication provider hook. So I'm just going to create a folder called hooks in here, and then I'm just going to do a one for auth provider. Oh, it should be TSX. And then we can do a export const auth provider equals. And typically what we're saying is we're going to pass in the children components to this and make sure that when we pass in those children components, they then get returned inside the auth provider. So I can copy the configuration within here. So this is the configuration that we've just copied from the samples, and we're just going to wrap that in here so that we can create an auth provider. So one thing that I've noticed is that I think there's a little bug here in this sample, because when you look on line 9, this is erroring, and you can see that it's trying to get the active account and it's trying to get 0. But if you look on line 7, the MSAL instance.getActiveAccount doesn't exist. It's checking that it doesn't currently exist, and it's checking that there is an active account in get all accounts. So I'm pretty sure that this needs to be changed to get all accounts. So that might be something to consider when you're looking at samples like this, that they might have some bugs in there that you wouldn't necessarily realize that they're bugs unless you were doing some critical thinking of, okay, what makes sense for this to go here. So I do need to definitely do a pull request for that actually, so I will do that shortly after this tutorial. So this is just saying that the children isn't declared because we are using TypeScript. So I'm just going to create a prop which basically specifies the type that our children are going to be. So I'll provide props. And I'm just going to specify that children is a React node. And then I can specify here that that's there. So we've still got a few errors here, and again, this is just because we have we're using the JavaScript code and we're moving it to TypeScript. So the payload here is trying to use the account info, but actually what it needs is the authentication result. So this is just saying, okay, well, only authentication results are of type, have the variable account. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cast that to authentication result first before we pass it in. So now the authentication provider is passing in the is getting the MSAL instance, and then it's checking whether or not the current account is active. If it's not active and get all accounts is has got an active account in there, it's basically saying set the active account to be the first active account in the list. And then if that's not true, then it also then has an event callback as well, which basically says if there's been a successful login, then also set the active account as well. Once that's done, we can then basically say return the results of this auth provider within a MSAL provider. We can set the instance of this MSAL provider to be the current instance that we've instantiated. And then inside of that MSAL provider, that's where we can put our children nodes. Once that's done, we can then export this into our hook. And now we have a successful auth provider created. And so the auth provider can then be used in the main class to actually like pass through to like encase the like application. So that is what we're going to do next. I'm gonna remove that. And then now we have this auth provider, we can now successfully like just encompass our application within the auth provider. And this is what's going to allow us to actually log in to the auth provider through our application. So now that's done, we now can actually go into our application here, and I'm just going to rename this to lowercase and have it kebab case as well, just because that's my preference. And so I'm just going to go ahead and do that, same with the CSS. I'm not really sure why they have it capital case when most React applications are like kebab case, so if someone knows why that's the case, please tell me, but I'm just going to add that in there. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go and look at what they have in the app like JSON here. You can see here that they do have like the use MSAL instance that they're getting in, which will be get from the like provider that it's been wrapped in, and then it will also be, they have a handle redirect that we have here. So what we're going to do in our like section is we're going to have a active account and we're going to have a unactive account button that we're going to use, and basically we're just going to say if authenticated use this template and if not authenticated use that template. So this is the like code what is essentially doing something similar, so we're just going to copy basically that on what that's doing, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So if I just copy this here and put that in here, I'm not going to bother like showing the claims for now, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a button in here that says sign out, and then you are currently logged in, and if you are logged in, I'm going to have, if you are not logged in, I'm going to have a sign in button that allows you to log in. The reason why I'm not bothering too much about keeping the template is because I think we're not going to be using that template for this application. This is just our starter application, and then like when we go into the actual like building of the application, we're going to be changing this anyway, because we're going to be adding some routes and stuff to like handle how to do this. So what this is saying is you've got this authenticated template for when you are actually authenticated, and you've got this unauthenticated template for when you are not authenticated. And I just realized I need to change this to be login, and this needs to be please sign in. So up here you can see we've got this handle redirect that is there, and I'm just going to like quickly fix these like errors that we're getting. But basically all it's saying is that we need to reference the appropriate fields from the MSAL provider that we're using. And this is handle redirect. So this is handle login redirect. We also need to have a handle logout redirect as well. And so you can just look up the documentation for what the handle logout redirect is, but I'm just going to copy that in as well. So once we have those in, we can just put this through to our button. So we can just do on click. It would be good if I stopped getting them mixed up, wouldn't it? So here what we're saying is in our unauthenticated template, we have a button that where we want to log in and we want to say, please sign in. And then in our authenticated template, we are checking, we have our active account. And if we do, we have a logout button and you are signed in option as well. Add this. I'm just going to change this class to be card because that's what we had before, and I'm pretty sure that is all we need to do for this class, and they are all the things that I needed in order to get this up and running. So I'm just going to check that I've got everything that I need. So we've got our client ID and our authority, which is what we need for our application. We've got our redirect URI, which will redirect to our domain, and then our the endpoint, which is we've just done // here, and then we have the default bit configuration as well. And then in our main file, we do have the auth provider, which is here, and we also are passing through the auth provider and encasing our application into that. In our application, we are then getting the instance, the active account. We have a handle login request and a handle logout request, and then depending on whether or not we are authenticated or not authenticated, we are saying you either want to log out or log in. And finally, we have our auth provider, which is basically setting the active account if it is there. And so I'm just going to run that now. So if you're not familiar with Vite, you can basically find the scripts that you need to run in this package.json file, or whichever package manager that you are using. And if you look here, you can see that you've got npm run dev, npm run build, npm run lin, or npm run preview. Npm run dev will run it in development mode for you. So now if I go to your localhost 5173, you now should see that we have our application here. We have a little login button that says please sign in, and then if we log in successfully, which will take us to our client registration that we need to accept, which this will only happen once. You'll only be asked to accept these permissions one time, but then once we've accepted, you'll then see that we can now log out. We can then log out, and I'm just going to leave that there, and then we can log in as well again, and then keep logging out. There we go. And so that's pretty much it. I am just going to change the logout to match the login redirect. So this should be a login redirect rather than a pop-up. And then I'm just going to change that now. Just going to have a quick look at what the expected, this should be logout, not login. Bloody hell. This is my problem. I don't read things properly. There we go. And so now the actual, if I log in again, you can see I'm logging in, and then if I log out, it should do the same thing. So yeah, perfect. So that's pretty much how we would get our MSAL instance into our application. Next week, I'm going to Next time, I'm going to show you how you can then connect it to an API, and then I'm also going to show you how you can use the authentication templates and the unauthentication templates to work with like React Router. Like I said in the beginning of this video, do you want me to do the backend in Python, Node, or do you want me to do it in like .NET? Please let me know and then I will do that next. Thank you so much for watching. I post weekly content on my YouTube and on my blog, and I also post daily content on my LinkedIn. See you next week, guys.